Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Travis Hall bought his dream home in Douglas County, he thought he'd escape the tyranny of HOAs. But when a self-proclaimed compliance officer from across the street started creeping into his life, he realized his fight for freedom was just beginning. And this battle, it was going to get messy. Buying a house out in Douglas County wasn't some spur-of-the-moment fantasy about living off the grid. I'm a real estate attorney, for God's sake. I knew exactly what I was doing. After 10 years of helping clients escape the claws of tyrannical HOAs, I wanted nothing more than a bit of land where I could plant a few trees, sip coffee without being fined for the color of my deck chairs, and live like a free man. So, when I found a modest home on 2 acres just outside the Red Hills Commons boundary, outside being the key word, I signed the dotted line faster than a notary on commission. The place wasn't flashy. Ranch style, single floor, good bones, big trees, quiet road, no sidewalk strollers, no speed bumps, and best of all, no HOA. I double-checked the deed, then triple-checked. I even ran the parcel through the county assessor's GIS. Just to be absolutely irreversibly certain, no association jurisdiction, my kind of paradise. First week in, I started settling into my routine. Remote work in the morning, yard cleanup in the afternoon, quiet evenings with a book and a good bourbon. No one bothered me, unless you count the occasional deer. But I noticed the neighbors across the county road were neat. Too neat. Their houses looked cloned. Mailboxes perfectly aligned, grass all trimmed to identical lengths, porch flags hung at regulation angles. Creepy, if you ask me. And then I saw the guy. Black tactical shirt, khaki pants, wraparound sunglasses. He was walking the sidewalk across the road with a clipboard and a Motorola radio clipped to his chest like he was coordinating a raid on a meth lab. I watched him pause in front of a house, kneel beside a lawn, and swear to God, pull out a tape measure. Then he wrote something down and moved on. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because I realized this guy wasn't a cop. He was HOA. I asked a neighbor, Caroline, I think her name was, when I bumped into her at the gas station. Middle-aged, friendly, a little twitchy. "Oh, that's Todd Bishop," she said with a forced smile. "He's, our HOA compliance officer." "Compliance officer?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean volunteer nosy neighbor with a clipboard?" She chuckled nervously. "Well, he kind of takes it seriously." Apparently so. Over the next few days, I noticed Todd more and more. Same outfit, same patrol route. Sometimes he'd park his Jeep with the HOA logo magnetically slapped on the side, looked like it was designed on Microsoft Paint, and watch from the corner. I caught him glaring at a teenager riding a scooter once. Another time, I saw him scold a landscaper for using a noisy leaf blower during quiet hours. Whatever the hell that meant. It would have been entertaining if it wasn't so close. My property didn't even share a fence with Red Hills, but I could feel the boundary bleeding. Todd's eyes followed every car that turned near my road. His gaze lingered too long when I was dragging branches to the burn pile. And one morning, I noticed something new. A black SUV creeping past my driveway. Slow, deliberate. And guess who was driving? Todd, of course. Sunglasses on, windows up, pretending not to see me while very obviously seeing me. I waved. He didn't wave back. That was my first real warning. The HOA across the street might have had lines on a map, but people like Todd, they didn't believe in boundaries. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of quiet you move out here for. I had just finished my second cup of coffee and stepped outside to check the gravel near the front gate. Some of it had washed into the drainage ditch after a small storm the night before. I was crouched down, scooping pebbles with a flat shovel, when I felt that unmistakable sensation of being watched. You don't live alone in the sticks without developing a sixth sense for that. I straightened up and turned. Sure enough, there he was, Todd Bishop, standing just outside the gate like he belonged there, dressed once again in his favorite black tactical shirt. This time it had a stitched-on patch that read HOA Compliance Unit. He'd added a black baseball cap, too, with the same homemade badge emblem. His arms were crossed, and he was staring straight at me like I was an escaped convict. "Morning," I said, my voice neutral. He didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, he held up a small black folder and said, "I'm going to need to see your ID and documentation for this property." I blinked. "I'm sorry, who exactly are you again?" "Todd Bishop," he said like it was supposed to mean something. "Enforcement liaison for Red Hills Commons HOA." I smiled slightly. Yeah, see, the thing is, I don't live in Red Hills. This property isn't in your HOA. You've got no jurisdiction here. He didn't flinch. We've had complaints. Something about unregulated gravel work and potential runoff issues onto community-maintained spaces. I looked at him for a long second, then deliberately dropped the shovel, leaned on it, and crossed my arms. This is a private parcel, zoned agricultural residential. I checked, twice. You're not the police, and unless you've got a county badge under that cosplay outfit, I suggest you step back. Todd's jaw tensed. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain the quality of the neighborhood. Again, I said slower this time, I'm not in your neighborhood. He stepped closer to the gate. Are you refusing to comply with a compliance check? I actually laughed. Todd, buddy, there's nothing to comply with. I don't answer to your clipboard or your patch. You're trespassing. If you want to measure something, I suggest you do it on your side of the line. He stared at me. The silence stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then he pulled out a smartphone and took a picture of my gate, then one of my mailbox. Then, without asking, he pointed the phone toward my truck and snapped a photo of the license plate. I stepped forward, my voice still calm. You take one more picture of anything on this property, and I swear to you, the next person you talk to will be a sheriff's deputy. And unlike you, they'll have a real badge. Todd didn't move for a second, but I could see the shift in his posture. Not fear, annoyance. The kind of irritation you see in people who don't like being told no. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and muttered, "We'll be following up." This isn't over. Then he turned and walked back toward the road, his radio crackling softly with static, probably just background noise because I highly doubted there was anyone on the other end. I watched him climb into his SUV, which still had that ridiculous vinyl logo on the door. He gave me one last look before driving off, slowly, like he was patrolling Fallujah and not a sleepy road in Douglas County. Later that day, I noticed something even more disturbing. 3 orange flags stuck in the ground along the edge of my property, near the street, the kind surveyors use. Only I hadn't hired any surveyors. I pulled them up, checked the plastic tips. They were marked with the logo of a local landscaping company, one I'd never called, and that's when it really clicked. Todd wasn't just playing dress-up, he was laying the groundwork for something bigger. It started like any other quiet Saturday. I had a thermos of coffee in one hand, a contractor's measuring wheel in the other, and absolutely no interest in dealing with anyone. My plan was simple: pace out the line where I wanted to install a fence, snap some reference photos, and spend the rest of the day pressure washing the siding. No clients, no emails, no HOA lunatics. Just me, my land, and some well-earned solitude. But fate, as usual, had other plans. I'd only just started pacing the west side of the property when I heard gravel crunching behind me. Not tires, feet, boots actually, heavy ones. I turned, and of course, there he was. Todd Bishop. Same black shirt with HOA compliance unit stitched across the chest. Same smug expression, this time with a body camera clipped to his collar and a fake earpiece trailing behind his jaw, like he was part of some tactical response team. The whole look screamed mall cop with a god complex. He raised his voice before I could even open my mouth. "Sir, you're being recorded. I'm going to ask you one more time to provide identification and proof of ownership for this land." I was standing on my own property, measuring for a damn fence, and here comes this walking lawsuit demanding paperwork like I was illegally excavating. Yosemite. I didn't even drop the wheel. I just stood there and said, flat and level, "Get off my land, Todd." He took a step closer. "You are in violation of community boundary protocols. We've received several complaints about unauthorized improvements on shared use land." "There is no shared use land," I said. "This property was carved out years ago. You can verify that with the county clerk. You have no authority here. You're not law enforcement. You're not even a security guard. You're just a guy with a clipboard and a fantasy." I turned away, finished pacing the last 10 feet of the line, and jotted it into my notepad. That's when I heard it, his boots moving fast across the gravel, and then the shove. It wasn't a bump or a brush. He drove his shoulder into my back with full weight, yelling, "Stop resisting. You're being detained under HOA Code 9.7. The hell I was. My instincts kicked in. I staggered forward, barely caught my balance, spun around, and tried to backpedal, but Todd lunged again. This time, we both went down. My notebook went flying, the wheel clattered into a bush, and I hit the ground hard, gravel biting into my palms. I managed to twist sideways and grab his arm, pure reflex. For a second, it looked like we were wrestling for control of a live grenade, except I was the only one remotely aware of how insane this was. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I barked, trying to shove him off. He was panting, trying to pin me down with his elbow in my shoulder blade, muttering something about community safety protocols. I could smell his cologne, something cheap and aggressive, like it wanted to pick a fight too. And then came the voice that saved my damn day. "Oh my God, I'm recording this. Hey, someone call the sheriff." I twisted my neck and saw Jenny, the neighbor from 2 doors down, standing at her fence with her phone raised. She looked horrified. Good. Todd froze for a split second, just long enough for me to shove him off and scramble to my feet. My shirt was ripped at the shoulder, one knee scraped raw, and my pulse was pounding hard enough to make my teeth buzz. "You just assaulted me," I snapped, chest heaving. "On private property. That's felony battery, genius." Todd didn't answer. He stood slowly, brushing gravel from his sleeves, like we'd just finished a friendly football drill. "You're under citizen's arrest," he said stiffly. "You resisted HOA enforcement. I have the right to detain you until police arrive." "You have the right," I said, walking toward my porch and unlocking the front door, "to get your ass sued into oblivion." Jenny was already on the phone with dispatch. I could hear her spelling out the address. Another voice, male, probably her husband, called out, "He tackled him! I saw the whole thing! That guy's nuts!" Todd tried to keep his posture together, but you could see the edges fraying. He knew the cavalry was coming, and for once it wasn't riding in on his side. The first squad car showed up within 5 minutes. Douglas County Sheriff's Department. Clean white body, blue stripe. No nonsense. 2 deputies stepped out. One older, stocky with gray at the temples and a face like he'd rather be anywhere else on a Saturday. The other younger, eager, scanning the scene like he was hoping this would be his ticket to a promotion. Todd was still standing near the gate, arms folded, posture locked like he was expecting a medal. I stood on my porch, arms visible, hands empty, blood still crusting on my knee through the torn denim. The older deputy looked at me first. "You the one who called?" Jenny answered before I could. "I did. I saw the whole thing from my porch. That man," she jabbed her finger toward Todd, "attacked him." Todd took a step forward, puffing up like a balloon at a kid's party. "I'm HOA Enforcement Officer Bishop. The suspect was trespassing on regulated HOA boundary land and became aggressive when I attempted lawful detainment under civil statute." The deputy held up a hand. "Stop right there." Todd froze. The younger deputy circled the yard with his eyes. "Sir," he said, turning to me, "can you explain what happened?" "I was marking my property line for a fence," I said, voice calm, professional. "This man entered without permission, demanded ID, then tackled me from behind when I refused. I have visible injuries. There's also a witness, 2 actually, and security footage from my front cam. Oh, and I'm a practicing real estate attorney. This is my property, not under HOA jurisdiction." I handed him my ID and a copy of the deed, which I'd had printed and laminated precisely for moments like this. I pointed to the camera above my door, blinking quietly. Jenny came over with her phone already open to the video. "I got the whole thing," she said, holding it out like a golden ticket. "He called himself a cop. Said he was detaining Travis under HOA code or some garbage." The older deputy took the phone, hit play, and didn't even make it halfway before sighing. He looked at Todd. "You're not law enforcement." "I never said I was law enforcement," Todd snapped. "I said I was an enforcement officer, compliance officer. There's a difference." "Not really," the deputy replied flatly. "You're wearing a fake badge, a tactical shirt, and calling yourself officer. That's impersonation." Todd's expression twisted. "This is a civil matter. He was in violation of code." "No, he wasn't," the deputy cut in. "He was on his own property. You crossed the line, literally, and you tackled him. That's battery." Todd's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hand went to the radio on his chest, like maybe he could call in imaginary backup to explain things. The younger deputy was taking notes. "You got any kind of license? Security, private enforcement, anything?" "No, but the HOA designated me as—" "That's not a license," the older one interrupted again. "That's a volunteer gig with a title. You're not legally authorized to detain anyone." They separated us formally, then cuffed Todd. Not hard, but firm enough that he stopped talking. He looked stunned, like he genuinely hadn't expected this day to go sideways. Like all those times he strutted around with his clipboard gave him some invisible shield. "Am I under arrest?" he asked. "For now?" "Yeah," said the deputy. "Impersonating an officer, trespassing, battery. That's 3 to start." He turned to me. "We'll need a formal statement, and we'll collect your footage. We'll also write this up for the DA." I nodded, already thinking ahead to evidence packages and deposition language. This was my world, and Todd had just walked into it blindfolded. Before they drove off, Todd looked back over his shoulder. His face had changed. No longer righteous, just confused. Like he couldn't fathom a reality where his HOA badge didn't get him what he wanted. I just stood there and watched them drive away. My knee throbbed and my shirt was still torn, but I'd never felt so damn solid on my feet. 3 days later, I got a letter, a real one, certified mail, official envelope with the Pine Crest Hills HOA letterhead. It smelled like expensive toner and bad intentions. Inside was a notice of HOA violation reconsideration, followed by 2 pages of polite, bureaucratic backpedaling. According to the letter, the HOA had reviewed recent events involving community compliance liaison Mr. Todd Bishop and determined that a miscommunication may have occurred regarding the boundaries of HOA enforceable areas. Oh, and no further enforcement action will be pursued at this time. That last part was underlined. At the bottom was a signature from the HOA president, Karen Whitmore. I'd never met her, but her name had floated around the neighborhood like mildew in a damp basement. She was the one pulling the strings. Todd was just the blunt instrument. I scanned the letter twice, then a third time. It read like they were trying to pretend Todd hadn't tackled me in broad daylight. No apology, no mention of criminal charges, just a miscommunication. I took a picture of the letter and texted it to Jenny. Her reply came back in seconds. "Miscommunication? He tried to arrest you." Yeah, that about summed it up. Later that day, I got a knock on my door. Not the police. Not Todd. It was a woman in a power suit and heels you could hear half a block away. Karen Whitmore herself. She didn't wait for an invitation. "Mr. Hall, I'd like to speak with you briefly, if I may." I stepped outside but didn't offer a handshake. "You've got 2 minutes." She gave me a smile that felt professionally manufactured. "We regret the recent incident involving Mr. Bishop. The HOA does not condone physical altercations or misunderstandings with homeowners." "Misunderstandings," I cut in. "He tackled me on my lawn." "Again, we regret—" "No, you're not here to regret anything. You're here because your liability just became a legal time bomb and you're scrambling to contain the blast radius." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's quite a perspective." "Karen," I said, folding my arms, "don't play games. You sent someone who impersonated an officer and assaulted a homeowner. You're lucky the sheriff didn't add conspiracy to that report." She exhaled slowly, clearly reevaluating her approach. "Mr. Hall, let's not escalate this. We simply want to avoid further legal entanglements with one of our community participants." "Funny. I'm not a participant. I'm not even in the HOA. I have the paperwork to prove it." "We believe that may be subject to interpretation," she said smoothly. I laughed. Actually laughed. "You believe? I've got land records, zoning maps, and the original covenants. You've got a delusional clipboard soldier and a PR problem." Her jaw clenched for just a second. "Perhaps we can reach some understanding. If you were willing to drop any pending complaints or suits, the board could authorize a goodwill payment." "Did you just try to bribe me?" "Not at all. Merely an informal resolution." "Karen," I said, stepping forward just enough to make her step back, "there is no informal resolution. You lied. Your HOA pretended to have power. It doesn't. And now you're trying to clean up the mess without admitting guilt." She looked at me for a long beat, eyes cold now, then gave me the same polished smile from before. "Very well. But I assure you, you're not making any friends in this neighborhood. Good thing I'm not here for the block parties." She turned on her heels and walked away, like she was still in control. But I saw it, that tiny hitch in her stride. The hesitation of someone who just realized they underestimated the wrong guy. I went back inside, grabbed my notes, and sat down at the kitchen table. The lawsuit was already half written. All I had to do now was fill in the blanks. The funny thing about suburban neighborhoods, you think everyone's minding their own business until one spark lights the whole cul-de-sac on fire. That spark was Todd Bishop body slamming me into my lawn. And the fire? That came next. I didn't start it, not intentionally. But after the video of my takedown made it onto a local Facebook group posted by a teen named Ricky, who caught the whole thing on his Ring cam, it spread like kudzu in July. By the next morning, I had 17 messages from people I didn't even know. Some offered legal advice. Some offered beer. A surprising number offered both. The HOA had poked the wrong bear, and apparently, I wasn't the only one. 2 days later, I walked into a neighbor's garage. Someone had turned it into a makeshift war room, folding chairs, coffee in a cooler, a corkboard with HOA violation letters pinned like they were FBI evidence. I half expected a picture of Karen with red string crisscrossing her face. A retired postal worker named Vince stood up and clapped me on the back. "The man of the hour," he said. "Glad you're here, Travis." There were 12 of us that night. 12 homeowners, all with the same haunted look in their eyes. All had been targeted in some way. Baseless fines, surprise inspections, vague threats about mandatory compliance. The HOA had been running unchecked for years, but now the tide was turning. A woman named Marlene held up a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "This is just my documentation," she said. Emails, letters, phone call logs, audio recordings. Karen's got her claws everywhere. I told them about my visit from Karen, about the thinly veiled bribe, about the letter trying to downplay a full-on assault. Every story shared that night seemed to add another brick to a growing wall of outrage. And then Vince leaned in. "You know what gets them shaking?" he said. "Unity. They're used to people being afraid, isolated, picking us off one by one. But if we organize, we make noise, we bring lawyers," Marlene grinned, "we become a class action lawsuit." There it was, the moment the mood shifted from bitterness to purpose. We made a plan. Weekly meetings, documentation sharing, a GoFundMe for legal fees. A local journalist named Ellie, who was already sniffing around the Bishop incident, agreed to meet with us. We weren't just going to resist. We were going to expose everything. The nepotism, the intimidation, the money trail. And that's when we found the real dirt. A guy named Daniel, software engineer, quiet type, revealed he had access to public records and had been hobby digging. He pulled up tax documents showing that Karen's husband was getting contracted for HOA landscaping at triple the going rate. Conflict of interest didn't even begin to cover it. That night, Daniel became our secret weapon. I left the garage that night buzzing, not from coffee, but from something I hadn't felt since this mess started: momentum. For once, I wasn't just reacting. I was part of something bigger, stronger. They thought I was just another homeowner to silence. Turns out, I was the megaphone, and now a dozen more voices were shouting through it. You never really expect your small-town HOA drama to reach the state level. Most people think of these disputes as local, petty fines, ugly lawn signs, angry neighbors. But ours had grown teeth and claws. And apparently, it had roared loud enough for someone in the state attorney's office to hear. It started with a knock on my door. I opened it to find two people standing on my porch. A clean-cut man in a slate gray suit and a woman in a navy windbreaker with a badge clipped to her belt. She didn't smile. He barely blinked. They introduced themselves as investigators from the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA. "I'm sorry," I said, blinking. "You're here for this?" The woman gave me a thin, tired smile. "Mr. Hall, we received multiple citizen complaints about the Red Hills Commons HOA. Based on what we've reviewed so far, this isn't just internal mismanagement. It could constitute fraud, abuse of power, and criminal misappropriation of funds. We're conducting an audit." Now that was a word I liked. Audit. They asked to speak with me about my incident with Todd Bishop. I led them inside, offered them coffee, and walked them through everything. The assault, the falsified letter from the HOA, the so-called disciplinary action that never happened, the bribe Karen offered. Their pens were flying across notepads before I even got to the part about the collective we'd formed. I handed them a flash drive. This contained security footage, scanned letters, HOA emails from neighbors, even HOA fee records pulled from public filings. The man looked almost impressed. "You've been busy." Let's just say I like building a good case. They stayed for over an hour, taking statements, copying files, and asking pointed surgical questions. When they left, they assured me this wasn't a formality. "This HOA's conduct may warrant more than just fines," the woman said. "You'll be hearing from us again." She wasn't kidding. Within a week, word spread that Dora had formally launched an investigation into Red Hills Commons. Karen and her board tried to downplay it, calling it a routine review, but nobody bought it, especially not when two more investigators started showing up to homeowner meetings, quietly interviewing people and collecting documents. Marlene told me she saw Karen outside the HOA office pacing, phone to her ear, shouting something about immunity clauses and liability coverage. Even Todd, who'd gone radio silent after the assault, had apparently stopped showing up for his little sidewalk patrols. And then came the cease and desist. Every resident received an official letter from the state instructing the HOA to immediately halt all fee collections, fines, and enforcement actions until the investigation concluded. The HOA was, for all intents and purposes, paralyzed. The mood in the neighborhood shifted overnight. People who once kept their heads down now stood on driveways swapping stories. Flags went up without permits. Lawn gnomes multiplied like rabbits. It wasn't lawlessness. It was liberation. For the first time in years, Red Hills Commons actually felt normal. But I wasn't celebrating yet, because the more layers we peeled back, the uglier it got. Daniel, our software guy, found something big. Over $10,000 in supposed community improvement funds were being funneled into a shell company owned by Karen's cousin in Arizona. The landscaping overcharges, just the tip of the rot. We handed that evidence over to the state. They didn't even flinch. They were already 3 steps ahead, building a fraud case. One afternoon, I got a call from the same woman in the windbreaker. "We're recommending criminal charges," she said calmly. "Your testimony and documentation have been pivotal." I sat down, heart thudding. "Against Karen?" "And others. But yes, she'll be at the top of the list." I thanked her, hung up, then just sat there, staring at the wall. This wasn't just about fences or pools or HOA fees anymore. This was about justice, and it was finally rolling in like a freight train. I've never been much of a courtroom guy. I always figured those battles belonged to lawyers in tailored suits and judges with gavel collections. But on the morning of Karen Bishop's arraignment, I put on my best jacket, double-checked the flash drive in my pocket, and walked into that courthouse like I'd been preparing for this moment my whole damn life. The gallery was packed. Turns out, when your HOA becomes the subject of a state investigation for fraud, abuse, and assault, people tend to show up. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months nodded at me with a mix of solidarity and restrained excitement. Todd wasn't there, no surprise. But 2 of the other HOA board members were sitting on the far side, looking like they'd just lost a week of sleep. Karen? Oh, she made an entrance. She walked in like it was a charity gala, hair coiffed, lips pursed, dressed in a white suit that screamed misguided innocence. But her eyes darted nervously, and when she saw me, her mouth tightened just enough to betray the mask. She looked down fast. The prosecutor, state-appointed, sharp as a scalpel, began with a statement so brutal it could have doubled as a eulogy. He outlined a pattern of HOA overreach, fabricated violations, misappropriation of funds, and, most damning of all, the organized intimidation of residents, including impersonation of law enforcement. I nearly laughed when he called Todd Bishop's sidewalk patrol a wannabe militia operation with a Radio Shack badge. When my name was called as a witness, I stood up and walked to the stand, every step echoing louder than the last. They asked me to recount the assault. I did, clearly and without exaggeration. They asked about the HOA's actions after that, the fines, the threats, the forged letters. I provided the emails, the footage, the internal HOA memos we'd uncovered. When I mentioned the bribe Karen had offered me to let it go, the courtroom went still. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge let it through. I wasn't the only witness. Marlene gave her account of years of fines and harassment. Daniel, bless his paranoid soul, broke down the shell company fraud with a slideshow. It wasn't just compelling. It was damning. Karen's defense was a disaster. Her lawyer tried to paint it all as miscommunication and volunteer fatigue, but even the judge looked unimpressed, especially when confronted with bank records showing HOA funds mysteriously rerouted through that Arizona LLC. Then came the twist. The prosecution revealed they'd subpoenaed Todd Bishop's phone records and internal HOA emails. One email in particular made my jaw clench. Karen had written, "We'll make an example out of Hall. The others will fall in line." So much for miscommunication. After 2 days, the judge didn't even wait long to issue a ruling. Multiple counts of fraud, abuse of power, criminal impersonation via Todd's actions, and civil liability for damages. Karen's bail was revoked due to risk of flight. She was taken into custody right there in front of everyone. She didn't go quietly. "I was the only one keeping order in that neighborhood," she shrieked as the bailiff cuffed her. "They're all ungrateful. I built Red Hills." As she was dragged out, someone in the gallery, might have been Daniel, whispered, "No, you milked it dry." And just like that, it was over. I stepped outside, blinking in the sunlight, half expecting more drama, but the sky was blue. Birds were chirping. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The HOA had fallen. But the real victory was knowing the monster behind it had been exposed, tried, and shackled by the very system she thought she controlled. The morning after the verdict, I woke up earlier than usual, not out of nerves, but something else. It was the kind of stillness that only comes when the storm finally moves on. For the first time in months, I didn't check the window for HOA goons or wonder if Todd Bishop was lurking in a bush with his fake badge and walkie-talkie. There was only silence, and my coffee machine sputtering like it too was adjusting to the new peace. News spread fast. Local outlets ran the story with headlines like "HOA president convicted of fraud and abuse" and "Neighborhood tyrant brought down by homeowner." My inbox exploded. Journalists, neighbors. Some guy from Florida who claimed the same thing happened to him and offered me a place to crash if I ever needed to hide from suburban fascists. I didn't need to hide anymore. The state's ruling was clear. Karen Bishop was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with an additional suspended sentence pending the outcome of ongoing federal investigations into wire fraud and tax evasion. Todd Bishop was fined, barred from holding any office in a registered HOA again, and charged separately for assault and impersonating law enforcement. His plea deal got him house arrest, community service, and, ironically, a ban on owning a walkie-talkie. The HOA dissolved. Red Hills was now under the control of a court-appointed transitional committee tasked with untangling the HOA's finances, refunding improperly collected dues, and coordinating with residents to return autonomy to individual homeowners. I'd never seen a neighborhood celebrate harder than the night that notice went out. It felt like a dam broke. People came out of their homes for the first time in months without watching their backs. Lawn chairs reappeared. Kids rode their bikes again. One guy even set off fireworks, which were probably illegal, but no one called the cops. Not even me. Still, not everything could be undone with one verdict. My property had been damaged. I had months of legal fees, lost time, and emotional fatigue that didn't vanish overnight. But every call, every email, every handshake from a neighbor who once kept their head down now felt like something bigger. Validation. Then came the restitution hearing. I sat across from Karen's lawyer. Karen herself was now appearing by video from a holding facility and heard the judge award me just over $180,000 in damages, not including pending civil suits from other residents. Karen tried to object, said she'd never personally profited. The judge shut her down by reading a list of transfers made from HOA accounts to her private consulting business. The cherry on top? The judge ordered the auction of Karen's lake house, apparently bought with HOA slush money, to begin paying restitution to the community. The moment the gavel came down, I could almost hear her scream from across the county. After the hearing, as I walked out onto the steps of the courthouse, Marlene and Daniel were waiting for me. Marlene handed me a cupcake with a big red X drawn in frosting. "For the HOA," she said, smirking. I took a bite. Damn good. I didn't want to be a hero. I didn't want the attention. But somehow, standing there in the sun, I realized that sometimes being the guy who refuses to back down isn't about being brave. It's about being sick and tired of bullies in khakis trying to run your life. And, finally, they weren't. A year later, I stood at the edge of my backyard, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, the morning mist clinging to the grass like it didn't want to let go. The fence was still there, the same one Karen's minions had called an unauthorized barrier. Now, it stood as a quiet monument to everything we'd survived. Red Hills had changed. The HOA was gone, its power scattered like ashes in the wind. In its place, a cooperative group formed. Not a new HOA. God, no, but a voluntary council. No fines, no threats, just neighbors helping each other mow lawns or organize food trucks on Fridays. I didn't run for anything, didn't even vote. That was the point. I could finally choose to step back. Todd Bishop's house sold at auction. Rumor had it he tried to get work as private security somewhere in Arizona, but with impersonating an officer on his record, options were limited. Karen? She was still locked up, her appeals going nowhere. Every few months, I'd get a letter from someone claiming to be her advocate, asking me to write a statement of leniency. I used them to start my grill. Some scars stayed. The cracked piece of trim near my front door where Todd shoved me into the siding, I never replaced it. Not because I forgot, because I didn't want to. I kept a copy of the lawsuit paperwork framed in my office. A reminder that sometimes standing your ground isn't just a metaphor. Sometimes it's your literal damn lawn. People ask me now what I would have done differently. I think about that. About all the sleep I lost, the rage, the near-obsessive digging for truth, the weight of it all. But in the end, I wouldn't change a damn thing, because now I know my neighbors. I know Vince, who still brews terrible coffee but tells the best stories. I know Marlene, who once beat a city councilman in Scrabble with the word embezzlement. I know Daniel, who started teaching kids basic coding in his garage. Hell, I even know Ricky, the kid who filmed Todd's assault, who's now interning at a local news station thanks to that footage. That whole mess, it forced us out of our houses and into each other's lives. Last week, we held a barbecue. Nothing fancy. Hot dogs, cheap beer, some terrible karaoke. But when the sun went down and someone lit a fire pit, we sat in a circle and laughed about things that used to make us furious. Todd's ridiculous fake badge. Karen's obsession with mailbox heights. The time someone replaced the HOA newsletter with a Mad Libs edition, still don't know who did that. I stayed quiet for a while, just listening, watching the faces in the firelight. I realized we'd all been trapped, not just by Karen or the HOA, but by our own silence, our own willingness to let small abuses slide, but not anymore. As the night wound down and the laughter faded into soft conversations, Marlene leaned over and whispered, "You know, Travis, you lit the match." I shook my head, smiling. Nah, I just refused to blow it out. We clinked bottles. Somewhere in the dark, a kid set off a sparkler, and for the first time in a long time, the night didn't feel heavy. It felt like home.